Welcome to Justified Riches Podcast. Justified Riches is a financial literacy podcast dedicated to empowering individuals with the knowledge and tools to achieve financial independence and professional success. Each episode bridges the gap between ambition and achievement by bringing together a seasoned mentor and an eager mentee for transformative conversations.
Frederick Douglass once said, "It's easier to build strong children than it is to repair broken men." And our mission here at Justified Riches is to create a stronger generation of youth through financial literacy.
I'm your host, Rich Tavares, aka Positivity Pusher.
And I'm the other host, Justin, aka Stock Knock Life.
And together we hope that you enjoy the show, take notes, and sit down and relax.
Enjoy the episode.
All right, and we are here for another episode, actually our third episode of Justified Riches Podcast. I am your co-host, Rich Tavares, aka Positivity Pusher.
And I'm your next co-host, Justin Aruz, aka Stock Knock Life.
And we have a real sincere pleasure here. This episode, we're going to be talking about taxation, finance, diving into money mindsets, but of course, catering it to our youth. Breaking it down so we could make it relevant for you. And I'm super excited about the guest we have over here. And she was definitely flexible on a little bit of short notice, which was absolutely amazing. It's almost like, you know, they say how the universe aligns when things are just like at the right timing. So we have here with us Kate McKeever. She's CPA, owner of Lilac Accounting, where she provides bookkeeping, tax, and consultant services to small businesses. After graduating in 2013 with a master's degree in accounting firm, whoop, whoop, from the Catholic University of America, she spent a decade working with a large national accounting firm as the senior tax manager, so that's like AKA Big Boss, for a global corporation. And also, I don't know how she found time for that, but amazing, an adjunct professor of taxation at her alma mater. 2023, she founded Lilac Accounting to bring the tax and accounting knowledge she learned in the corporate world to small businesses. She's passionate about helping small businesses, which I've seen, especially meeting her in Huga. And she wants to help owners build financially healthy businesses to support their families and serve their communities. Also, that's not on her bio. She's also a Huga Nook facilitator. So shout out to the Huga small business community because she's representing there in the Nooks. Some of the things I thought about and even just reading. And what I will say is, you know, sometimes you see people's like marketing and it's like, all right, it's looking on the website and then they're like completely different people. So you could tell like a consultant was hired. But in her case, things I saw that I know personally from knowing her as well, approachable, collaborative, photogenic for sure. If you happen to check her out on Instagram, which she'll be happy to let her there. And she focuses on mindset. And the last thing I'd say why we're so excited to have her as a guest too, if you notice in her bio, she did the corporate, you know, had the big job managing big business, and yet her passion brought her to really wanting to make a difference for small business owners. And similar here at Justified Riches, where we're really trying to take that information and bring it to the people. We couldn't have a more appropriate and apropos guest for episode number 3 as we have Kate here.
Welcome.
Thank you. What a wonderful intro. That was awesome.
Yes. Yeah. Can't forget our mentee though.
Please.
So go ahead, mentee.
Christian Tavares here, senior in high school, and I'm ready to learn how to value your money better, you know, in the best ways possible.
Right.
Excellent.
I always like to give like kudos to people who you know, leave the 9 to 5 and start their own business. You know, I know that's could be very how can I say, like, it's not easy. So like, how did that come about? You know, walk that path for us.
Yeah, I got my accounting degree and followed kind of the traditional path into a big accounting firm, which was great for experience, but it's a lot of long hours. It can kind of a grind. And I always had this itch to eventually work for myself, but I knew I wanted to get some more experience under my belt first. And over the years, friends or fellow alumni from my college would come to me if they were starting their own businesses, because I was one of the only like young CPAs that they knew. So they would ask me like, how do I pay my taxes when I'm self-employed? Or should I form an LLC or a corporation? Stuff like that. So I started to think, you know, there's really a demand among young entrepreneurs to work with an accountant they can relate to. So maybe I could find enough of those kind of clients to go out on my own. So just a little over a year ago was kind of the perfect opportunity because I got married in 2023. We don't have kids yet, but we figured, if I'm going to take a risk and go out on my own, this is kind of the time to do it.
Right.
So, yeah, it's a lot of hard work, but it's certainly worth it.
Did you always know that you were going to create your own business?
I had in the back of my mind that I did want to work for myself eventually, and becoming an accountant first is actually a great way to do that because you already understand like the bookkeeping and how to form an entity and a lot of the things that other people struggle with in the beginning of starting a business, you do every day for other businesses. So it's kind of an advantage.
All right. This is actually like the perfect time, like we're doing this podcast, because it is January. It's tax season. Are there any like upcoming deadlines for like business owners that they should know about?
Yeah, when Rich asked me if I could do this Saturday, I was like, this is a perfect time of year. So there's a few. If you are self-employed, if you own a business, you have to pay quarterly estimated taxes. So the last quarterly estimate for 2024 is due January 15th. We're recording this on January 11th, so hopefully get that in on time. Another one is January 31st. You have to send out W-2s and 1099s for your employees or contractors if you're a business owner. And then if you work for a business, you'll receive those shortly after that. And then March 15th is the filing deadline for partnership and S corporation returns. And April 15th is the big deadline that most people know about. That's for individual tax returns.
Man, just recited those off the top of your head. That's absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
I didn't even see any notes in your head.
I've, lived it for 12, 13 years now, so.
You got all of that, Christian? It's a lot of dates to remember, man.
Yeah. April 15th, if you take away one day, April 15th for your personal tax return.
So
Know that date.
I know you touched on the 1099s and W-2s. For our youngsters out there who's just beginning their work career, their work journey, like what's the difference between 1099 and a W-2?
Yeah, I'm glad you guys asked about this. This is a super important topic, especially for young people to understand. So when we talk about a W-2, that's the form that you get if you're an employee of a company. And that will tell you how much they paid you and how much tax they withheld. When you're an employee, your employer will withhold the taxes for you. So you're paying your taxes in a little bit at a time throughout the year with every paycheck, which is nice because the money's already set aside. They'll pay it to both the IRS and the state for you if you live in a state where there's income tax. On the other hand, though, if you're an independent contractor, the business is just paying you a flat fee. They're not withholding the taxes for you. So it's your responsibility to figure out how much tax you're going to owe on that money and pay it in yourself, either quarterly or if you didn't do that with the tax return when you file it. So it's important when you get a job to understand, am I an employee or an independent contractor? Because that will determine if the business is setting aside the taxes for you or if you have to do that yourself. So I see a lot of people get tripped up on that if they're an independent contractor for the first time and they were used to being a W-2 employee before that. They just assume the taxes are coming out of that money, and then they're not if you're an independent contractor. So you don't want to be in for a surprise when you file a tax return as an independent contractor.
That's a great point. And then, so let's say young person, they didn't ask all the questions and they're not sure yet. How, and maybe looking at their pay stub, can they tell the difference there? And with a 1099, do you get a regular pay stub or?
No, not usually. So if you're getting a regular pay stub, you're probably an employee, and that would tell you how much tax is withheld for the IRS and for the state. And then if you're an independent contractor, you're probably just giving the business like an invoice that they're paying you the flat fee. So there's not taxes coming out of that.
Okay, and these are good, and we won't get too much into it, but I think it's good, especially for our young people, and not hating on any of the employers out there who are doing their own practices. But I remember as a young person, business would be like, "Oh, I'm going to pay you off the books." You know what I mean? Yeah, I'm going to pay you cash, and you should be so happy, you should be so lucky, and then almost where. I won't say the business take advantage, right? Because every business tries to do the right thing, but maybe just diving in slightly to that, like, off the books versus on the books, and maybe what a young person should know about to at least protect themselves.
Yeah, if you're getting paid off the books, they're certainly not withholding taxes for you. Technically, it is still your responsibility to report that income. Does everyone do that? Not necessarily, but according to the IRS, you are responsible for reporting all the money that you make, even if it's from illegal activities. That's a fun side note. So it's still your responsibility to include that on the tax return if you meet the minimum requirement of income that you earn to have to file. So you should be keeping track of how much you earned, even if that business says that they're quote unquote paying you under the table.
So what happens to all that the money that's not paid? Do you know, or does it just have to like not be paid?
So then you'd be responsible for paying the taxes yourself. So a good rule of thumb is if you're being paid as an independent contractor, not as a W-2 employee, you want to be setting aside money little by little throughout the year for taxes so you're not surprised by a bill. A good rule of thumb would be like 25, 30%. But of course, it's going to vary because there's a lot of factors that affect your actual tax rate, like how much you earn, what state you live in. So I can't give like a fixed percentage that will apply to everyone. But if you put aside like a quarter to a third of it, you won't get in too much trouble. I had another point. Oh yeah, so another thing I recommend if you're an independent contractor or have your own business, you're working in some way that the taxes isn't being withheld for you, put that money that you're setting aside for taxes in a high yield savings account. So it can be earning you some money while it's sitting there throughout the year. And then you'll be less tempted to spend it too if it's in a separate account that's not your typical checking account.
Good point. So, like, what's
Thank you.
my daughter? She's 15. She's about to start working this summer. At what point does she have to report like her earned income? What's like the threshold?
So it changes a little bit every year, adjusted for inflation. So if you're watching this way in the future, this might have changed. But for 2024, the threshold is $14,600 of earned income. So that would be income from a job or a business that you run. And that's because it's whatever the standard deduction is for a single filer, because if you earned less than the standard deduction, it would just reduce that. And then you might also have to file as a minor if you have unearned income. So that would be income from investments. And that's a lower threshold. I believe this year it's $1,300. And again, that changes a bit year to year. And with unearned income, it's only when you actually sell your position. Like typically it would be from stocks or something like that. It's not just the value that it increased, but it's only if you actually made a transaction to sell it. That's when it becomes taxable.
Yeah, my daughter, she gets, well, the two oldest ones, they're 15, 13, they get from the investment account a 1099. It's for the dividends. They get one for the dividends. I don't know, it's 1099B or D.
Yep.
I don't know.
B, yeah,
It's
or
B.
div. But it can be in a consolidated one. Sometimes if you have like interest, dividends, and stocks, they'll put it all in one.
Okay, nice.
So you were saying then, sorry. So if I'm, let's say, Christian's age and I earn maybe $7,000, I don't have to file a tax return.
Right.
if
Yeah,
I'm
because it's
under
under
18?
the reporting threshold. As long as it's earned income from like a job or a business. Sometimes, though, you might still want to file if the employer withheld taxes on that for you and you want the refund of that withholdings. So say he made $10,000, he doesn't have to file technically, but if they withheld $1,000 from that, he doesn't owe that tax because he's not required to file. So you file the return to get the refund back.
Oh, okay.
Oh, money, man.
All right.
Oh, a teenager.
So the next summer job, right? You could earn like $5,000-$6,000 in a summer job. If they're withholding taxes, then you would still want to file. The parent would file, or the youth would file their own return.
The youth would file, and it depends how much they were withholding. Depending the information you gave them when you signed on for the job will affect how much they withhold. And sometimes if it's very, very little, it might not be worth the hassle of filing. But that's something that you want to check when you get your W-2 at the end of the year. It will tell you how much was withheld, and if you don't have a tax liability for that amount, and you want that money back, you can file a return to get the refund.
So, sometimes my ADHD kick in. So just to make sure.
Yeah, it's funny. That's why I was writing notes too, because I missed details. So I'm like,
Yeah.
Me too. So if a child is making under 14,500,
14,600
I'm sorry,
this year, I believe. Yeah, I know.
14,600.
Very specific amount.
they're not liable to pay any taxes.
If it's earned income,
If it's
yeah,
earned-
like
if
from a
it's
job
earned
or
income.
a business.
Okay,
Yep.
that's good to know. That's good for the parents to know also. You know.
yeah, absolutely. And speaking of that ADHD, because I'm always like, the minor details are not like my strong suit, but the big details are. So for our audience, two easy ways to check if you right, and correct me if I'm wrong, your pay stubs, right? So that little piece of paper that comes is not a bad idea to save it, or a lot of employers are sending you an e-pay stub, or give you like a website like ADP to check it. But when in doubt, you could look at your pay stub or your W-2 for the year, right?
Yes. Yeah, your W-2 will give you the final amount for the year. You should get that like end of January, early February the following year.
Isn't there two other like tax forms, like a I-9 something?
Yeah, that's the one that you fill out when you get the job, and the W-4. And those tell your employer some information about you, and that's how they'll determine how much tax they're withholding.
Right. So with a W-4, so for the young ones who are just starting to work, they're first filling it out. Like I know there's a portion on there that says, was it zero, the dependents? Mm-hmm. Like what should they be putting on the W-4?
It's going to depend in everyone's situation. Unfortunately, I can't give you broad strokes, but probably if you're, a teenager working your first job, you're going to check that your filing status is single and that you don't have any dependents. But definitely, either consult a family member or your accountant, read the instructions of the W-4 form to make sure you're applying it correctly to you.
And just as a reminder, too, this episode is not intended to be tax advice or financial advice. So Kate is a CPA, and she will be giving us her information at the end, where if you want that advice or if you want that finite information that you would want to take action on, you'll be able to speak to her directly. So.
And taxes is like it's like a funny situation, man, because it's so many. I feel like it's so many like rules and regulations. Like how much work do you have to put in like every year? Like I know it changes like year to year. Like do you take time for yourself to like, okay, I need a whole 2 weeks, 3 hours just to go over the new regulations?
Yeah, it changes year to year. Like you said, so there's some years where we have a lot of changes at once. Like back in 2018, we had the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that changed a lot of rules at once. And then there's some years where smaller amounts of things change. But as a CPA, I'm required to do 40 hours minimum of continuing education per year just to stay on top of the stuff. So I always do at least that minimum, sometimes more if a lot's changing.
This is good, and I got to say thank you, because this is really like a great clinic. It's almost like a little how-to, because, right, we're all in that position where we're getting our first job. I know Christian worked at, Long Beach. Shout out to Long Beach, summer job, favorite job ever, right? There, but, this is really, really good information. And one of the things, too, is I know from the parental side, or let's say now once someone's over 18, then it could, every year, I know, even myself, I'm like scratching my head. Are they still a dependent? Are they not a dependent? So if you could touch on a little bit that information, that would probably be valuable for parents too. At what point, and again, this is not, these are broad strokes, as we said, this is not like exact precise advice, but what's a good indicator for, all right, my daughter who's 20 years old, at what point is she a dependent versus at what point is it beneficial to let her file on her own?
Yeah, that's a super important thing to clarify as a young person before you file your return. Establish with your parents or whoever you're living with, am I a dependent on my parents' return or not? Because that's a box that you check on the tax return. Can someone else claim you as a dependent? And that changes some other things within the return. So you want to make sure you're clear if you're a dependent on someone else's return or not. And then for the parents, figuring out who in your household is a dependent. Depends on a few things. It depends on the amount of support you provide, their age, where do they live, are they a full-time student, So usually if someone is, mostly living in the home and just away at college, they're probably still a dependent if they're under 25. So there's several different factors that you need to look at, in each unique family situation. But yeah, generally it's under 18 or if they're a full-time student, up to 24.
And then the 14,600, does that apply for the 18-year-old in terms of whether they would be dependent or not? Well, you know what? I don't want to like pigeonhole it because I guess this is where it is good to speak to a professional like yourself. When you're kind of coming to that, like let's say you have your 18-year-old, maybe they earn $12,000, $13,000 for the year, but they still live at home. That's where we would want to consult a professional to kind of see what is the best advantage, whether I would claim them as a dependent or they would be on their own.
Yeah, because we also want to factor in the parents' tax situation and what's beneficial for them as far as claiming the dependent or not.
It's good to mention because I'm always looking for like, just get to the bottom line, tell me. But, as much as we try to bounce around and dive around this, speaking to a tax professional, a CPA like Kate, is important and is extremely worthwhile from an advantageous standpoint. So don't try to pigeonhole this in kind of like one scenario.
Definitely. I didn't realize how important having a CPA was until I started my own LLC. So once I started that, I realized like I've been going all these years without a CPA. It's very important. And I don't know if you can, touch on like, how important it is to have a CPA or the difference between a CPA and then someone using like a TurboTax.
Yeah, right.
Or your best friend's uncle, who's good
Who
with
does
numbers.
taxes on the side?
Yeah,
My
you
Uncle
hear that
Johnny,
a
who
lot.
twice 2 years out of the month does taxes, right?
Yeah, so CPA stands for Certified Public Accountant. We have to have a degree in accounting, certain minimum education requirements, work experience in the field, and we take a very in-depth 4-part test that's administered by the state. It's kind of like what the bar is for lawyers, the CPA exam is for accountants. So that certifies that we know what we're talking about because the government doesn't want just anyone giving out this kind of advice. So you want to make sure you're working with a licensed professional. There's also something called an EA, which is an enrolled agent. They can also help with tax returns. That's a slightly lower certification, but they also are definitely capable of preparing tax returns. There's also some accountants who are not CPAs, like a bookkeeper might, be considered an accountant, but they might not have that CPA designation, and the CPA is what allows us to sign your tax return for you, prepare it for you, and communicate with the government about it. And it's really important to work with a CPA when your tax situation gets a little more complicated. Tools like TurboTax are helpful if like you work a W-2 job, you don't have a lot of fancy deductions or credits you're trying to take. If your return is pretty straightforward, tools like that can be helpful. The IRS even has some free ones. If you make under certain amounts of money, you can file a tax return for free, which is a good thing for some young people to know that this doesn't have to cost a fortune. But yeah, certainly if you start a business, when you get older and your tax situation gets more complicated, you want to seek out a CPA. And they'll usually, pay for themselves in the amount that they're either saving you in taxes or, guiding you financially. So it's worth the investment.
And it's a good standpoint too, right? I always like thinking about the principle of pain or pleasure. So from a pleasurable standpoint, right, there's tax advantages, maybe save a little money, and then from a unpleasant standpoint, not dealing with a professional like yourself, could be some liabilities afterwards, right? Like, hey, Uncle Johnny, who doesn't, I don't have an Uncle Johnny, but I'm just saying Uncle Johnny, who does taxes 2 months out of the year and, is able to get you back $5,000 and you think they're the best ever. What are some of the detriments of using Uncle JJ to do your taxes on the side?
Yeah, if it's someone who's not licensed, you're ultimately responsible for that tax return. And if you are not paying in the correct amount of taxes, you can get assessed late filing penalties or interest. So if you're paying too little, it could eventually catch up with you, and then you'll end up owing more than you would if you just paid the correct amount initially. So that's why it's important to get it right the first time.
What will happen if you just don't pay those?
So they're going to start assessing penalties and interest when you don't pay, and then eventually you'll start getting letters in the mail from the IRS, which is, never fun.
Very
And then,
intimidating.
yeah. And eventually they could start garnishing your wages. They could have a lien against any property you own. And, ultimately, in the most severe case, you could end up in jail if you are totally avoiding paying taxes for years. So definitely not something to mess with.
Absolutely.
I've gotten those IRS letters. I was a 1099 guy for maybe like a year or two, and I took cash the check and didn't put no money to the side. The letters will come. Trust me. Even if it's like 2-3, I think it's like it came 2-3 years later. You owe this amount of taxes. Yeah, so gotta be careful.
And I feel like, too, I think that's important to touch on, right? That the IRS kind of never loses track. So let's say Uncle Johnny does do your taxes and they get you $4,000 back and you take a nice vacation with those $4,000, then maybe a year and a half later, what might happen if you weren't really entitled to those $4,000?
Yeah, then you're going to owe it back with interest and penalties. And it's important too, if you do ever get a letter from the IRS, to first make sure it's not a scam. There's a lot of scams out there related to tax notices, so always make sure it's directing you to a legitimate government phone number or website, and looks legit. And also, respond to it. Don't just avoid stuff like that, because the interest and penalties will continue to accrue and catch up with you. Excuse me. And then if you do owe money, there are installment payments you can make sometimes, so it's not always that you have to pay that lump sum. Sometimes the IRS will work with you to pay it in over a reasonable amount of time, but you have to set that up with them. You can't just establish your own timeline for that.
So does the interest vary over time, or like does it vary in certain cases, or is there like a set percentage?
It's usually a set percentage. I want to say it's around 7%, give or take. And then there can be other penalties on top of that, like if you just didn't file the return at all, depending how late it is.
Thank you. And you touched on something that we always try to educate, regardless of the topic. There seem to be scams for every possible topic, whether it's in banking or anything else. So as far as IRS scams, does the IRS call you? Because I know sometimes even in banking, customers will come in and be like, oh my God, the IRS said that they were going to show up to my door and they were going to take away my car and like hurt me if I didn't like pay this bill. And you get a call and you could be frazzled. So does the IRS make those kind of calls?
No, that's a great point. So they'll contact you by letter first, always. So if there's a phone call, or even worse, an email, especially with a link, that's not the legit IRS or state. So yeah, make sure you're responding to the letter first. And another common scam related to taxes: if you're using a tax software or website to prepare a return on, make sure it's a reputable one, like we talked about. I think TurboTax or H&R Block, ones like that. We never want to be entering sensitive financial information into just any website. So make sure you're using a trusted provider for those.
If per se that letter were to actually get lost in the mail, right? Is there a way that like you can like tell them that like you actually genuinely did not see like the letter?
I think that would depend on a case by case basis. With the agent assigned to your case.
In my case, yeah, they know. I could have told them, listen, man, I'm just getting this letter. Now that interest occurs.
Wow.
If you're not paying it,
It's just gonna keep
year
going
over
up.
year, it's just gonna add up.
Yeah, good point. And then something too that we talk about even in the banking biz is go directly to the source. So when in doubt, if you got that phone call, you go on irs.gov, right? You could set up a user ID and a name, and usually any information or liabilities that you have should correlate on the website. Is that correct as well?
Yeah, exactly. You want to make sure that you're going to the .gov website, calling the IRS actual hotline telephone number.
So always check with the source. And I'm going to ask this one, which might be a little controversial. So again, this is not advice per se, but I know something growing up sometimes, dependence, where it's like, hey, I got 7 dependents or 6 dependents. Why don't you claim like 2 under your taxes? I'll claim like 2 under mine. Anything we could touch on that? Not to, not to pigeonhole as to get us too controversial, but I know I've heard sometimes before where, you may have where, hey, I'm at the max, so why don't you, these aren't your dependents, but why don't you go and claim my dependents and I'll like split the money with you?
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend claiming anyone who's not actually your dependent.
It's real thing.
Yeah. If you get audited, you'd be required to provide proof based on all the criteria that they were truly your dependent. And if you couldn't prove that, then you'd maybe owe more tax if you took that deduction when you shouldn't have. So definitely don't try to get cute and break the rules. I recommend only claiming anyone who is truly a dependent. I think there's a lot of, mindset around like, how can I avoid taxes or what are these fancy tricks to get around it? I tell my clients, like, it's just best to get it right from the beginning. And I want you to earn enough money that you have the money set aside for taxes. You don't have to do these sneaky things to try to get around it. It's better just to have the savings, pay the right amount, and that'll keep you out of trouble in the long run.
So in that case, you guys like both get in trouble, or is it only the other person?
Yeah, if a CPA signs a return knowing something was fraudulent, they can get in trouble too. But if someone tries to do something fraudulent on a return, then sometimes the CPA won't sign it because they don't want to get in trouble too. So if you want to work with a reputable tax professional, they're not going to let you get away with stuff like that.
Right. Like you said, it's like a lot of things. It's like a deep rabbit hole we could go when it comes to taxes. But like even like my kids, like they work for my business. Like they do the editing for my Instagram and other things. And I know.
And our podcast. Shout out to Sanaya.
Right. Shout out to my daughter Sanaya, with the little editing. But if I pay my child under my LLC, and that's another myth buster, that you see social media talk about, like you could pay your kids, and it's tax free. Is that something that's how true is that? Or
So you can pay them if they're truly working for the business. And if the amount that you determine is, a fair amount to pay them is less than that filing threshold, then they wouldn't have to file a return and pay the tax on that. So that part is true. But you want to make sure that they're actually doing something to earn that income and that you're paying them a fair amount for that work. You're not just trying to manipulate that number to keep it under the threshold.
right.
And, part of the theme or the title of Justified Riches is that there's plenty of ways to earn money. There's plenty of ways to earn riches. And we want to do it in a legitimate manner because, right, it always catches up to us. Quick scenarios, get rich quick schemes. There are plenty of legitimate ways to earn money. So I think if we're trying to give the audience principles, it's, pays better to do it the right way the first time, especially now I would imagine with technology and AI, these government agencies are getting more and more ways to kind of track down on the fraud. I know they're doing that in banking. And another principle is always speak to a professional. It's always worth the money to speak to a reputable professional like yourself, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I like the first point that you touched on about doing things the right way. I think it's important to reframe taxes sometimes as not this like bad thing to always try to be avoided. It's actually a blessing to pay taxes. If you make a lot of money, you're going to owe taxes at some point. And it's not something to try to get to zero. It's something to plan for and know how much you're going to owe, because if you are financially successful, it's part of being in a society is paying taxes.
So in a family business, like if a child is working under like a parent, right? Is the parent like required to pay the minimum wage to meet that status or no?
Oh, that's a good question. That one's going to vary state by state too. And that kind of gets into employment law, which I can't necessarily advise on.
Yeah, Chris is trying to advocate
I'm
for all the young people working for them.
It was a
I love that. No, it's a good question.
Yeah.
Sounds like you're trying to throw someone under the bus.
No,
over
no,
there.
I know an employment lawyer if you want to.
There you go, Christian. No, it's all good. We're about knowledge. No, feel free, Christian.
Hey, minimum wage is listen.
Angelina does get paid, FYI, right?
So what's some good money tips? You know, this is a financial wellness podcast for youth and teens. What type of money management tips you think is you could give them?
An important one I would recommend is if you do have that independent contractor work or at some point you start a business, make sure you keep that money separate than your personal money. If you have any business funds or money that you earned as an independent contractor, it will make your tax return prep easy if that's all in a separate place than your personal spending. So keep that in a separate bank account. That's actually required too if you form an entity for a business. And then another one that would be relevant to young people is when it comes to college savings and paying tuition for school. There's some tax credits available for that, so that's something that young people can take advantage of. There's the lifetime learning credit and the American Opportunity Credit, depending what stage of your education you're at. So make sure you're looking into those and taking advantage of those if they apply to you. And then, other money tips is related to taxes. We kind of touched on earlier was setting that money aside as you go instead of having to pay it one lump sum at the end of the year and not having it available. But again, you only need to do that if you're an independent contractor or own a business. If you're a W-2 employee, they're going to be withholding that for you.
Okay. Nice.
And that's a good point. So especially too nowadays, at 14, 15, 16, especially via social media or Instagram, there's all this earning potential. If you do have a business with your CPA, do you kind of just wait to the end of the year when it's tax time? All of a sudden now, I just need to kind of speak to them once a year?
No, if you are a business owner, you're required to pay in taxes quarterly. So you want to make sure you're talking to your CPA on at least that quarterly basis. That's a common mistake that I see business owners make in the first year is they don't know that and they think they can pay all the taxes at the end of the year, but it's going to end up costing you more because there's going to be some late payment interest assessed on that tax. So get ahead of it by hiring a CPA from the get-go the first year you start the business.
Good advice. Christian, I know you're taking a financial literacy class or financial literacy course?
Personal finance.
Personal finance. Have you guys come across, start talking about taxes or investing or?
Yeah, we had a small unit on that. We were really just talking about forms. I remember that. I was in. I'm trying to get rekindled with it.
It's
Yeah, it's a lot. So what I realized, because I teach a financial literacy class, taxes is like a big thing when I talk to the kids, and they don't understand. They're like, why do I have to pay taxes?
Yeah.
I work hard, I earn this amount of money. They take about 25, 30%. What would you say to the kid who has that question for you? Why do I have to pay taxes?
Yeah, we all do. It's part of, living in society. Hopefully it's paying for, things that you're benefiting from, like our infrastructure and whatnot. That, kind of gets in the question of politics, what that money is being used for. But
Right.
yeah, there's no avoiding it. So I think it's important to embrace and understand as a young person, because as long as you're working, you're going to be paying it in some form.
You brought up a good point because I remember personal development guy Jim Rohn. He used to have this kid like, "Why should kids pay taxes?" And then he would ask a 6-year-old, "Well, do you ride your bike on the sidewalk?" Right? And it's like, "Well, yeah, I do." All right. Well, would you want to ride on a bumpy road or a road with potholes? And I know that's debatable, right? Whether you have potholes or not. But I guess in general, these are the things maybe that the young people may not know that it's the stoplights, you said the road, riding your bike on a road power lines, right? Make sure the power lines aren't hanging on the sidewalk while you're walking around.
Right.
there.
Yeah. Social Security, you'll eventually get some of that money back when you retire. That's another debate too, how long that's going to be around for and everything. But in theory, that will, come back and benefits later in life.
Right.
One of the things you were talking about, which I think is really good, and I feel like that potentially makes your practice unique, which I enjoyed, was you were talking about right, money or numbers can seem like a black and white thing, but there's a little bit of like mindset involved and something you talk to your clients about, like a mentality kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I work with a lot of business owners, and I see sometimes they have this mental block around money, or they say things like, "I'm not a numbers person. I'm bad with money," and I can see in adults that probably goes back to things in their teenage years or childhood. So I think it's important to kind of watch how you talk to yourself about money and rewire that. If you find yourself saying things like, I'm bad at budgeting, or I don't like numbers, try to rewire that with like, I'm learning about money. I'm interested in money. I can figure this out. Because all the math that's involved in taxes and accounting is like addition, subtraction, multiplication, stuff you learned in, fifth grade or earlier. There's nothing crazy in terms of the math. And it's more about being organized and detail oriented. And I think that's something anyone can grow in that skill of. So watch the way that you talk to yourself about money and try to use more positive phrases around that. I think that's a good habit to get into young.
Excellent. What if we could ask, because I know where, thank you, Angelina. Lilac, what a little bit was it specifically lilac? Was it because it's the flower, or what? Maybe a little bit of origin story on the name of the firm.
Yeah, so the name of my firm is Lilac Accounting. Most accounting firms are named after the owners. It'd be like McKeever and McKeever CPA, and always thought that was kind of boring. So I wanted a more original name for my business that would be something that's easy to say and spell and remember. I think that's important in the world of like social media and online business. You want to have a memorable name, and I came up with lilac because it's my favorite color. I like flowers, and it's just kind of flows. It's easy to remember. And I work with a lot of female business owners, so it's got kind of a feminine feel to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I got a kind of pink watch band, so I could definitely appreciate the color there. Also, too, what I feel like is very interesting or modern is you utilize social media a lot, where maybe a lot of CPAs are like, well, I don't really need to advertise, or social media is not for me. Like, definitely tell us like where individuals can find you on social media, and maybe just a little bit about like your approach, or is it an effective solution for businesses?
Yeah, absolutely. Instagram particularly has been huge for my business. So my handle there is at lilac_accounting. And I try to get on there and, just do little stories about my day, make some educational posts with some information that people will find useful. And I find that it really helps build trust with the customers. And in my field, that's so important to trust a CPA and like them. So social media has been huge for that. I find that people will hire me after they've followed me for at least a couple weeks on social media, and they see that, oh, I like this person, I want to work with them. So if you can use social media, organically and show up authentically, I think it's a huge boon for your business.
This is a little bit of a random question, but just curious. If you were to like either completely restart or create a new business like from scratch, like what would you want to go into?
That's a good question. Been asking myself that lately too, because I have maybe a second business of me in the future. I'm an avid golfer, so I'd probably do something related to that. But the nice thing about having worked in accounting is, I already know how to do the bookkeeping. I know how to form the entity. So accounting, if you're considering that as a career, it's a great springboard into other areas of business.
And thank you, Christian.
Yeah,
That
so
is
golf,
excellent.
something golf related, simulator maybe.
Something golf related. Excellent. And one of the things that I find, especially for our viewers, numbers don't lie, which is cool, right? People make up stories, but numbers ultimately tell a story, and it's kind of hard to tell a lie with numbers, would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. It's powerful information, especially about your business, the accounting side of it. So understanding, the financial reports and the bookkeeping. It's can tell you a lot of helpful information if you can embrace it and understand it.
And then when you can't, that's why you need a professional like yourself, right? So you don't have, if you're a business owner and speaking from your mindset standpoint, not that I'm not a numbers person, but let's say numbers aren't my favorite thing to work on, that's where a professional like yourself would help kind of demystify or help them see whether they're profitable or whether they're earning income or not.
Yeah, absolutely. We can't improve what we're not measuring and tracking, so numbers help us do that. And it doesn't have to mean anything about you as a person if you're not earning as much as you want to yet. But if quantifying us gives us a starting point that we can improve on from there.
It's like realizing that you need something, but you don't know. Like you're walking around without a belt, and then finally you start using the belt. You're like, oh man, where did this invention come from? That's a CPA, man. Like, once I got one, I'm like, man, I've been doing my taxes all these years without a CPA. It's just it takes a bit of stress away, because you feel like your money, your taxes is in the right hands, and they're gonna do the right thing, by you. So, shout out to all the CPAs out there. I know it's their busy season, so. You too, Kate. I know taking the time out to come out today. I know it's your busy season.
Yeah, my pleasure. No, it's an important topic. I'm excited you guys want to talk about it on the podcast.
So, do you do taxes for people? Is that how that works? Or
Yep. So I specifically work with business owners, but there are other CPAs who will work with anyone. So I'll do the tax return for the business and the business owners. And then I also do the business bookkeeping throughout the year too. So help them track all the money coming in and out of the business and give them financial reports so they can, improve the business from there. But yeah, there are some CPAs who do only tax returns. There are also other CPAs who work inside of businesses, ones who audit financial statements. So there's a broad range of things that CPAs can do, and taxes is just one piece of that.
So they don't have to worry about anything but having the money, right? You help them only with the taxes, right?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Part of what the client does is gather the information that I need to do the tax return, and that's a good tip for young people too. Is when you get these tax forms in the mail, we're getting to that time of year where they're going to start coming. You want to keep those organized. That will make your life a lot easier when you go to do the tax return, or even if you hire a CPA, it's going to be your responsibility to get them that information that they need to do the tax return.
And usually, I know you guys are good with, the reminders. I think I got my reminder already about the, was it K9? Is that the form it's called?
K1 would come from the LLC or the S Corp.
Right, it's the K1 form. I think there's a deadline on that. Well, I don't know when the deadline is, but I know I got the email already. So.
Good thing you got a CPA. One of the things that we really love to ask our guests is what's in its simplest form, if you could put one phrase on a highway billboard that speaks volumes either about your own personal values or something that you've always went by, what's either it's a quote or a saying or what's something that's been a mantra for you throughout your life?
Ooh, Rich always asks such deep searching questions. I love it. This kind of reminds me, I think I put this as my quote in my senior yearbook. I might butcher it a little bit. It was always do the right thing, even when others wouldn't know. I think that certainly applies to taxes too. Do it the right way, not because you're afraid of someone else finding out, but because it's what's right and you want to do it right.
Thank you. I know Christian asked you last time. If you have one, I know every time we ask each other, we have to come up with a different one, right? So I'll say shout out to my friend Adam Holzer, Huga Business Community. One of the things that I like that he says is hard conversations today create easier time tomorrow. Easier conversations today create harder times tomorrow. And I think it's apropos as a CPA, because sometimes we want to run, as a business owner, may want to run away from the truth or whether their business is earning revenue or not. But sitting down, and the earlier the better, having, even if it's a hard conversation where it's a real conversation, they're better off having that versus having easy conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely applies to taxes too.
Excellent. Also, too, as we're heading out, want to shout out Nam Studios, where this podcast is filmed. So, as Kate has said, digital media and a digital presence is important, really, for any business owner. So, certainly check out namstudios.co if you want more information on establishing yourself as a digital presence, which is key to small business. Anything you want to leave us with there, Justin, Mr. Unburied Talent?
Yeah, I'm rocking my business shirt today. I'm Buried Talent. We had a workshop earlier. Went great, went fantastic. So we're a financial literacy wellness group. We go around to the communities. We educate people on different financial literacy topics, and we're very excited about things to come.
Excellent. Christian, any shout outs you want to give out or any last words? Doesn't have to be a quote. Anything you want to leave us with here?
Threw me on the spot here. I don't know. Not really. I can't really think of it right now. Sorry.
All right. That's cool. As we're wrapping up, Kate, I want to sincerely say thank you. Really, just getting to know you, your presence, your kindness. You seem like you really care, which I think is so important. I know me dealing with professionals, yes, I want them to be competent, right? That's a key trait, but also knowing that they actually care, that they genuinely care about what they do, and there's purpose behind what they do. I mean, it's clear, right? Senior tax manager, big firm, and yet, you found your purpose and you really wanted to help get that information to small businesses, to help make an impact, which ultimately just ties in beautifully to the whole ecosystem of the world there in terms of helping out small businesses that are the engine. So, I mean, it's really been a pleasure. As you're leaving us, please remind us again where we could find you both, either on Instagram, also your website, anywhere else that you would want our viewers to be able to reach you, or their parents as well.
Sure. Thank you for having me. On Instagram, I'm at lilac_accounting. That's a good place to find me. I'm pretty active on there. And then my website is www.lilacaccountants.com.
Excellent. And also, too, you do workshops, right? So if you're always kind of like doing a business seminar. I think I saw on your Instagram you got like a recent thing coming up with Alex Hurd and another, or did that pass already?
No, that's coming up this Tuesday, the 14th. Yeah, and I have a couple other planned for later in the year. So if you follow me on Instagram, all that information will be on there. But yeah, I like to do, educational stuff throughout the year online too. Mostly geared towards business owners, but there's always information anyone can glean about taxes from those.
Fantastic. It has been a pleasure, ladies and gentlemen. The podcast wouldn't be the podcast without the amazing guests that we have. So thank you, Kate. Thank you, Christian, for being our fill-in mentee as well. Always phenomenal. Anything last word you want to leave us with, Justin?
No, thank you so much, Kate, for coming out. The weather is not so good too, so definitely appreciate you coming out.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And that's a wrap, as they say.